Well, Pat, here we are yet again, another penultimate episode, and we're damn near finished with yet another season. Season 5, episode 9, entitled The Dance of Dragons, is named after some other bit of history from Game of Thrones that I didn't bother to research, so I don't necessarily have the facts and info right now. But this is the beginning of a cap-off for a very, very problematic season of television, besides the fact that it is just for Game of Thrones. Do you have any thoughts you want to tell the people before we get started?
Well, Dom, I think the Talkin TV family, that's Talkin Thrones with us tonight, basically they're going to agree with me that maybe this is a dance with Tyrion, right? Because he has one of the coolest deaths, or not deaths, but
one of the coolest
kill scenes, right?
Oh, it's awesome. It's awesome.
Listen, he saves Missandei, and if it wasn't for him, she would have been mincemeat. So Tyrion has basically the drop on one of the harpies there.
Tyrion is able to do what it seemed like an entire army of Unsullied was unable to do in terms of killing that one Sons of the Harpy.
Yeah, I just don't know. I'm sorry to interrupt the intro.
We'll get into that. We'll get into that in the episode.
What is with these Unsullied?
I have plenty of notes on that. All of that and more on tonight's episode of Talkin Thrones. Sorry, Pat, didn't mean to step on your toes there, but don't worry. I did have a note written there where I literally had just in that moment, because obviously we'll cover the dragon pit sequence at the end of the episode, but I had it down there. It's like, man, the Sons of the Harpy really are the Unsullied's kryptonite. Just every single time these stupid Sons of the Harpy pop up, there's all of a sudden these incredible warriors that are just so badass and can take out so many people at once. They just stand there like morons.
I think every time that the Unsullied are mentioned, particularly in this season, I just get amped, and I just want to raid against what they have done to the Unsullied.
Well, because if you think about it this way, these guys are pitched as being the ultimate badass fighting force. The whole thing is that aside from the Dothraki, the Unsullied are some of the best fighters in the world, to the point where everybody that even hears about it, everybody hears that Daenerys is an army of Unsullied, they're like, oh shit, we better not ever get into a fight with her, because these guys, they will not stop until they have achieved their victory. And then you have this bunch of ragtag assassins in these stupid ornate masks, and they make them look like just regular chumps hired from the street. And it's like, just the inconsistencies there.
Dom, now the way they set up the Unsullied, right? 8,000 of the most fearless warriors ever. To me, it seems like it's 8,000 Mortal Kombat characters. And, they're just so powerful and, OP, and they're going to take everybody down. But then we get to this season, and they basically, are tripping and lunging and
just
they don't
leaving themselves open and exposed. It's like they literally freeze as they're
they don't seem trained at all.
What is going on here?
My mind is weird, because I'm thinking, these are 8,000 of the most lethal combatants that are gonna save Earth from that of the Shadow Realm. But no. They're not. They're basically. Did Daenerys just stop training them? Tell them to take the day off.
So what's even crazier? I'll add one more point to that as well. It's that you don't see the Unsullied have this problem ever again, because I feel like the next time that you actually see the Unsullied fight in force after these next 2 seasons, it's only twice more. It's when they take Casterly Rock in season 7, where they take out the Westerosi soldiers with no problem at all, and then when they have their fight against the undead in obviously in the Long Night, when almost all of them are killed. But at that point, it's okay, that's understandable, because that's a horde of zombies. Even the best fighters in the world are going to have a tough time against it, So it's just the fact so I feel like we would be more excusing of it. I'm not saying that there is really an excuse for it, but if there was some sort of continuity that was established of it, but no, it's literally just for this block of time while they're dealing with the Sons of the Harpy that the Unsullied are just reduced to just being useless, fodder, cannon fodder.
Yeah, ultimately it comes down to just being a plot device, and they're just made to look a little bit weak, maybe too
Yeah, but the,
weak
pro- the
for
problem
my
the problem is
taste.
it does its job a little bit too well. And well, I will say that is one of 1,000 different nitpicks and problems that I have with this season as a whole. It has definitely etched its way more so up the list the more that we have discussed this season in depth. Look, we're almost at the end. We're on episode 9 of 10. Another penultimate episode. Like I said, I love discussing the penultimate episodes because this is always where the big event goes down. Whatever the season is building to, it always happens in episode 9. And then we obviously have episode 10 as kind of like the fallout, the reaction to it. Obviously, we all know what it was. Season 1, it was Ned Stark's death. Season 2 was the Battle of Blackwater. Season 3, the Red Wedding. Season 4, the Battle of the Wall. Sometimes we get penultimate episodes that take place entirely in one setting, usually of which results in a major battle sequence. And what we get here is another is another penultimate episode that takes place across a couple different events, but it's more so focusing on a series of specific events. It's really primarily focusing on the North, the Dragon Pit at the end of Meereen, and Dorne, and then we get brief check-ins at the Wall and Braavos as well in order to try and set up for next episode. But I guess what was so fascinating to me about this penultimate is rather than previous penultimates, where it felt like episode 8 was kind of providing a lot of the setup for the major event to happen in episode 9, obviously, and then episode 10 being the follow-up. Rather, what we have here is because Hardhome, we had Hardhome last week, right? That we talked about.
So this is like a double feature, right?
Which was such a
Hardhome
tremendous
is like a
episode.
penultimate episode,
right? Hardhome ultimately was the real penultimate of this season. So what you end up getting here is something that almost feels like a part 1 of a 2 finale. Like, I remember the first time I watched this episode, the big thing is knowing that we were going to get the Dragon Pit sequence. And I knew that just based off of what we were told, what this season had told us, that it was not going to play out at all how it played out in the book. So you can imagine my shock when not only did we get the Dragon Pit sequence, and while it didn't play out exactly like it happened in the books, it still played out like pretty damn well and was pretty damn engaging and fun and really awesome to watch. We also got like a series of other events that just seemed to be like setting up for stuff that we were going to get in the finale, which is kind of rather new territory for Game of Thrones because they'd never really done that before. Because as crazy and as jaw-dropping as the stuff that we got in the penultimate episodes previously were, those always felt like kind of like self-contained episodes. Like you felt like they never really left off on cliffhanger. They never really felt like they were setting up anything. They felt like kind of these singular events that happened that then almost like kind of the rest of the show like had to react to and that's kind of like what was the majesty of Game of Thrones so much, that like you would think the story would be going one way and then you would just hard cut right with these penultimate episodes with something crazy that would happen, and then it would force the story to go in this, crazy new direction. And so I'm assuming that this comes up just like I said, that they're in wrap-up phase. They're trying to get they're trying to get things into like more of like a traditionalist TV sense. But I don't know. I was just wondering if you had like any thoughts on that before we dove into what actually happens in this episode.
I think it's one of those things where this particular episode here, has a lot of concise moments, and it's sort of setting us up for the future. So I guess, in a sense, because they knew they were going to do the fighting pits as sort of the end of this episode, and that was going to be sort of the main thrust of this episode. A lot of the other stuff that is setting up for future events, that normally would have been left for like episode 10. But we're starting to get some of that happening here, in this episode. And I think, obviously, I don't remember the season finale. I still have to kind of watch it.
Let's just say that there's a lot that happened. Like we're like for just a foreshadow for next week, Mother's Mercy. There is a lot that happens in that
so
episode.
I think it's one of those things where I'm going to have to watch the next episode to really answer that question. Because quite frankly, it's been a while since I've seen the end of season 5. So it's one of those things where comparing it to previous seasons and how they've ended is not something I'm going to do until I'm able to watch that episode.
Yeah, 100%. But from what I remember from season 5, there was a lot that happens in that episode, and I'll save that for next week. But I guess the only other thing that I really have in order to add to this penultimate episode, as far as what else sets it apart from previous penultimate episodes have always kind of been centered around like one major event. We've had episodes where there are, obviously the odd seasons previously, those are the ones that have had multiple storylines happening, versus the even seasons have been like kind of the battle, one location centric episodes. But they've always kind of revolved around just the setup for the one event. And I guess the thing that really makes this penultimate stand out is this is the centerpiece for 2 major gigantic events with the Dragon Pit sequence and everything that happens there, and Shireen Baratheon's death, which is obviously an event that does not happen at all in any capacity in the books, but is clearly something that this season has been building to, whatever our thoughts previously were on how they were building to it and the trajectory that they chose to take with Stannis Baratheon's final destination in this season, as opposed to how it goes in the books. Like, it's gobsmackingly tragic and just awful how it presents itself. And it's kind of like almost like a 1-2 punch where you have this awful gut-wrenching death that happens, and you feel like that's it, and then you cut to this sequence, you're like, whoa, okay, and like you have this gigantic battle sequence that almost causes you to forget what happened. So it's a little bit of a new thing, and in a strange way, it almost kind of does set us up for a Battle of the Bastards next season. But let's get into it. So before we stop, so the way that we're going to structure this episode, we're going to start it off with Stannis' arc, and then we'll cover the Dragon Pit sequence at the end, and we'll cover the stuff that happens in the middle as well. But first, I just want to do the quick check-in at the wall that we get in this episode. It's a very, very brief sequence, really only setting up for next week's episode, really just kind of hampering home that it's the Night's Watch is kind of done with Jon.
Yeah, Sir Alistair basically is looking over the wall, and he sees all the wildlings, and he obviously has to believe Jon's down there, and he goes and lets them into the camp, and
right.
Sir Alistair is basically like, you killed us all,
Yeah. Well, it's a great moment of tension. It's a great moment of tension because it pays off the line that the Wildling woman who died last episode gave to Jon, where he's like, I gave orders to let you guys through the wall, and he's like, you better be sure that you're around to make them for sure that they follow that orders, because you know how it goes, as we see, when the person dies in action, they're very quick to all of a sudden forget the orders that he left in place. The changing of the guards happens relatively quickly, and as we know, the Night's Watch, for the most part, their view of the Wildlings does not align with Jon. And I think that even though it's very, very brief, the moment that we get this episode, I love those kind of the moments that we get where we just kind of see the residual exhaustion from all the Wildlings, where you can tell this is a totally different, kind of meetup between the Wildlings and the Night's Watch than what happened last season, where last season, they were ready to fight this gigantic war, and now both parties are just kind of exhausted from the residual fighting. The shot of the one Wildling father carrying the daughter, and then when the giant goes through the wall, and everyone kind of tenses up for a second, and then he just breathes out heavily because he's just fucking exhausted from having trekked all that far. Like, I think it does a really good job of emphasizing just the struggle that they're going to have to come up with, obviously building off of Hardhome and just the craziness that happened in that episode. But it also, once again, like, this is the moment where it's like Jon really sees like the effects of his actions, both from Sir Alistair, when he talks to Sam, is like, Hardhome was a failure. I lost how many guys? And Sam's like, yeah, but look at how many people you saved in addition. He's like, I don't think that's something that's lost on them. And he points towards the disgruntled Night's Watch members who are just glaring daggers at the Wildlings. Then obviously the final shoe, the final cherry on top is, Ollie. Jon gives him a smile, and Ollie just looks at him with absolute disgust, just like kind of all the admiration for him is just
good
gone.
Good old Ollie, right?
Good old Ollie. We gotta give him a shout out. He's not long for this world in this show, so we gotta give him a shout out whenever we can.
Well, he, like I said numerous times before, he has like a really good character arc, but he's kind of a secondary character. So it's there's a place in my heart for Ollie as a character and for what he does for the show, but at the same time, it's like, man, I kind of just want this character off the show.
Don't worry, you don't have much longer to wait. It's only next week, and then like he dies within the first 3 episodes of season 6. So like I said, that's the thing that I will say about season 6. The first 3 episodes are really effective as far as clearing a ton of characters off the board. But so let's cut to the north. So let's do it. We're finally here. We've been dreading it. We've been building it up. We've been dreading it this entire season. This is unfortunately the episode.
Doesn't Stannis' arc start with basically the camp being invaded and burned?
Ramsay's plan is carried out. He infiltrates it with 20 men, is able to burn most of their supplies, kill half their horses. Like they're effectively crippled and screwed. And he even admits it's like, look, look, we've marched too far. We can't turn back to Castle Black. We won't make it with the supplies that we have, But he's like, we're too close to Winterfell, but we don't have the supplies or means to continue to fight to Winterfell. But if we turn back to Castle Black now, like we're even more screwed, because then we won't have the supply lines. So it definitely is a tricky situation. And as much flack and as much criticism as I did have for them choosing to ultimately have Stannis's arc end in tragedy rather than victory, I will say that they do a pretty good job of establishing just how dire the stakes are for Stannis, as far as just the dire needs of a situation where it's like, look, we literally have no other choice but to start moving forward and taking Winterfell because we've come too far to the point where we can retreat to Castle Black, as like Davos was suggesting a couple of episodes ago. So now we've it's interesting because the way that
Stannis is put on a downward spiral pretty quickly because it's like, obviously Ramsay has his men, he destroys the supplies, and they're gonna use the killed horses for meat and feed them for like the immediate future. But ultimately, you're right. They're kind of going up against this battle. The timetable has been moved up. They inevitably have lost, the upper hand. And so they got to go into it. And this puts Stannis in a more desperate situation than he's been before. And so Melisandre has been asking him for a while now to use sort of the blood magic because his daughter, Shireen, is basically a prime example or is a vessel of the blood that Melisandre needs. And, this is what presents us with the really disgusting action that Stannis takes.
Yeah, it's
with the support of his wife, which is even crazier. The fact that she's so devout in this, God of light sort of worshiping, that she just blindly allows for this decision to happen. And, from what most of the stuff I remember from episode 10 of the season happens with, the Stannis storyline. But it doesn't end well for Stannis' wife because she instantly regrets, being a part of this blood magic stuff,
like,
and
instantly,
just to amp up the tragedy even more.
At the very least, Stannis understands and is still willing to partake in kind of the fruit of his actions as far as he understands that as despicable and as disgusting and as just in violation of every kind of sacred and moral truth there is to being a human being as this action is, at the very least he understands and is still willing to go forward with it, versus Selyse, who does not nearly have Stannis's Stannis's firm iron stance or Stannis's tenacity, instantly bucks at just the sight of her daughter being burned alive in front of her. And it's crazy where after all the death, all the destruction, all the bloodshed, all the despicable shit that we've seen, we literally just watched a pregnant woman get stabbed in her stomach multiple times. Not even 2 seasons ago, we saw a dude get shot in the throat with an arrow in the last major battle sequence in last season, and yet somehow this Trump, again, not even a few episodes ago, we're talking about Sansa being viciously and brutally raped for literally no reason other than just the creators wanted to do shock value for shock value's sake, and yet somehow this death just tops them all. For me, easily, this is the most heartbreaking death on the entire show. And the reason why I have that here is just the fact that
I think it's well produced.
It's 100% well produced.
Her
if
pleas,
anything, well produced.
Yeah, her pleas, just please, Daddy. It's oh my God, it's
heartbreaking. It's
hard.
Awful.
It's one of the most difficult things to watch. Not that some of these other moments that you mentioned are not difficult to watch.
Right.
We talked about how we could have done without the Sansa stuff.
Right.
But the
I'll
fact
tell you, for me, where it comes from as far as what makes this death so difficult as opposed to all the previous ones is because this is really the first death that we have where we see an innocent character, a relatively innocent character who for the most part has not really partaken in any of the events that have happened in this season. And what's it called? Effectively dying as a result of it. But the difference between Shireen's death,
there's nothing within her control. She's
exactly
sort of ripped from her, sort of safety. Stannis is supposed to be protecting her, and he ultimately betrays her, and there's nothing else that could be done because Stannis was her protector and did a great job up until this point, but he was convinced that the only way to win is to do this, and because he's so obsessed with the end goal, he doesn't really think it through and ultimately goes along with the ride. To a certain degree, we argued about Sansa and why she agreed to go along with Littlefinger's plan. Ultimately, it didn't seem wise in terms of the way it played out in this season for Sansa to even agree to go to the Boltons
Right.
and
But
be
the
a part
difference
of this.
being is that the way that Littlefinger posed it to her, she had a choice at the very least. And it's disgusting even more so because Stannis kind of poses it where he kind of needs this one thing from his daughter, and his daughter like wants to help without actually understanding the gravity of the situation. Sansa at the very least had some understanding of what she was getting into versus Shireen, who was too
Yeah,
young
well,
to really experience the horrors of the world, just had no idea exactly what it is that she was signing
yeah,
up for.
and even though Sansa didn't quite, like, they didn't give her necessarily the right scenes to really push back against Littlefinger or just realize that something is afoot here and that maybe it's not a great idea. Like they didn't really give her too much of a backbone, in this season. That she kind of just gets ushered along by Littlefinger.
Right.
But I think what they were trying to go for is that she's learning from the master and she's starting to understand how he plays the game and therefore think for herself. And, my disappointment in the Sansa character is that they don't really give her enough credit. Her character should have saw something happening, sneaking suspicion, and done a lot more to sort of, try to prevent her getting into sort of another spot where she's tortured. So like, I think the fact that the showrunners didn't give Sansa enough of an opportunity to try to escape what Ramsay Bolton does to her, that they basically just throw her into that situation to basically tell us, like, you thought Joffrey was bad, well, Ramsay's worse. That kind of undercuts the characterization of Sansa. So I think they just mishandled that, ultimately making that storyline kind of the way it is.
Yeah.
And you're right, with Shireen, they craft this really well throughout the season.
I will say this, even if I'm not in agreement of where the overall storyline goes, the setup and the build up to this event was impeccably done.
Yeah, just the whole scene of Shireen asking Stannis, like, am I embarrassment or whatever? And like Stannis telling the whole story about, I bought this doll and, it gave you sort of the, the dragon scale or whatever it is. And how he basically went across the world to find someone that could cure it. And he sets himself up as the ultimate father that's going to do anything for his daughter to keep her alive, to keep her protected. And, we see this sort of relationship play out throughout this particular season between father and daughter. And ultimately, when Ramsay destroys the supplies and puts Stannis in this sort of bad position, that, he decides to take this action just because, Melisandre's magic has worked in the past and that he's going to have to believe, and take it on faith that the magic is going to always work every time that he invokes it.
Right.
And, this is one of those moments where it actually fails him.
Right. Well,
And
at least not yet.
Well, yeah, next episode.
Well, we'll find that out, obviously, the results of it in next episode. And
the tragedy of the whole situation is, really well done, I think.
The tragedy of the situation and kind of what comes of as a result of this decision, I'll talk about in the next episode, because I actually have a very, very controversial opinion about where obviously goes. But again, that just goes to my overall thoughts on it. But as far as how it's executed in this episode, it's absolutely brilliant. It accomplishes exactly what it's going for. It's one of the most, probably for me, it's between this and Hodor, honestly, for just like the most like heartbreaking moment of the entire season, especially because Game of Thrones, it for all of its like kind of like deplorable acts that it does, it's not really known for being a show for having like, gut-wrenching and heart-wrenching moments like this. So this is kind of new and unexplored territory for them. I guess probably the closest that it comes is Egret. And, last season in season 4, but like this is just approaching a whole new level. And also props to Davos as well. Liam Cunningham, like I said, he's kind of, he's obviously about to play a much bigger role in the next couple seasons, obviously, once he kind of shifts from Stannis to Jon, but like just once again, like solidifying, kind of the loving relationship that he's developed with Shireen, and even how that factors into ultimately how that builds up to it, when Stannis very obviously sends him away because he knows that Davos was the only person that would not go along with or support this kind of a decision in any way, shape, or form. Just considering that, like, even for Stannis' nephew, Davos set free, and now Stannis is going to sacrifice his own daughter, and just like the build, it's amazingly well done from a story standpoint.
I think also the thing you can't forget is Davos giving the basically the horse,
right,
to Shireen.
the stag, and obviously how that ends up setting up for season 6. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because that moment comes back like when he actually realizes what Melisandre did and her role in basically Shireen's death.
Right.
And that's going to have a major impact um, in events in season 6.
100%. So yeah, so let's cut into the other kind of primarily set up storyline real quick. We check in with Braavos. More oysters, clams, and cockles, Pat, your absolute favorite. But at the very least, we got the intro over with. So really the only thing that comes from this scene is mostly just Arya seeing Meryn Trant. And I don't hate this arc, but I feel like the what I really want to discuss about this section of the episode is kind of how this arc signifies where Game of Thrones priorities were previously versus kind of where they are now. Where you have Arya continuing with her mission in order to kill like the weird, oyster merchant, and as she's right about to carry out the assassination by pouring the poison.
Well, it's not the oyster merchant. It's the
sorry, not the oyster merchant, the merchant guy.
Yeah. He's basically just has some sort of insurance scam.
Yeah, the insurance
going on.
So the insurance salesman, let's call it. She's about to carry out the assassination. She's Mace Tyrell and Meryn Trant arriving at Braavos and meeting with what's his name, Mycroft from Sherlock, whose character's name in the Tycho Nestoris. That's it. Meeting with Tycho Nestoris, portrayed by Mark Gatiss, one of the showrunners, who also portrays Mycroft Holmes in BBC Sherlock. And here's the thing. So obviously, as far as just being the setup for Arya wanting to kill Meryn Trant, one of the many people on her list, going all the way back to season 1, he's the dude who killed Syrio, her dancing master. Meryn Trant is a dude who has been on Arya's shit list for a while now. So that is all fine and good. I don't have a problem with the setup there. What I do have a problem with is kind of where it shows where the priorities are. Where obviously the whole big thing that's established here is that Meryn Trant, in addition to just being an overall piece of shit, is also a pedophile. With the whole scene in the brothel where the woman, the procurer, is bringing out all the different women and showing off. And he's like, too old, too old, too old. And then he brings in a little girl and he's like, oh, she'll do nicely. And it's like,
I think my argument here is like Arya essentially is in with the faceless men,
right?
And she's all in on sort of that training. And I think, what's happening here, at least what they're trying to set up, is that, she's supposed to be forgetting her list, supposed to sort of be someone different, be no one. And therefore, when we see Meryn Trant being such a evil character that he's going to beat up and assault children in this brothel every night that he's in Braavos, that it gives Arya sort of a reason to break her immediate vow and basically execute this guy. And so I think story wise you have to set up such a reason for her to basically try to throw away her whole training with the faceless men to go back to who she was and go try to scratch this name off her list. I think that's the motivation here in terms of why he's all of a sudden, going after children in a brothel. And we're really trying to set up for the audience that a realistic scenario where Arya is willing to risk it all and take out this guy, despite the fact that she's supposed to be training, she's supposed to be no one, she's not supposed to have grudges from her old life. And, I don't necessarily agree that I'm excited to see this character be elevated to, despicable levels.
I mean, 100%. I agree with everything that you've been saying, but I guess my problem comes from the fact that it's kind of a little bit of the Ramsay Bolton situation from a couple episodes ago, where it's we kind of are already aware. It would have been one thing, right, if this is a completely new character that we'd had no previously established relationship with. That would have been one thing. But the fact that we kind of are already aware of what kind of a scumbag this guy is, just based on his previous actions. I'm sure you can make the argument, okay, but Arya wasn't there to see it. But she already had enough of a reason to hate this guy and to want to kill this guy. So I guess just the need in order to continue to show what a scumbag he is by adding that on top of it, it just feels excessive for no reason.
But I think that's the way that the show handles it. They're showing us, the viewer, that he's this terrible, despicable guy, instead of making it clear to us, the viewer, that Arya, doesn't really want to break her training, doesn't really want to go after this guy, but she's compelled to go after him because she doesn't realize, oh, wait, he's more despicable than I ever thought. It should eat at her that, her training says not to kill him.
Right.
And, we should see that, and we should see that building throughout these scenes, that, she can't stop it, that she really needs to just let him be, let him go. He is a despicable person, but the Arya character, that's not who she is.
Right.
She isn't no one yet.
Right.
So
She's inherently still a protector of the innocent as well.
Yeah. So we needed to see a relapse into who she was. And I think you could have built that up a little more to be stronger in this scenario. And I don't think they necessarily do that. I think it's almost like Arya's acting willy nilly. But obviously this is the sort of beginning of the end of her faceless men journey, because she's disobeying. She's going back to her old ways. She's not really digging into her training. So it kind of takes us in that direction. It's just, you needed a little more time to maybe have this guy be despicable, and she's, holding it back. She's doing a good job. She wants to, she's really has to be wrestling with what she wants to do in this world. But I don't feel that. It's just almost like immediately a switch is flipped and she's got to kill this guy.
Right. 100%. Yeah.
So there's no like her wrestling with her inner desires. And I think that would have made a stronger character to really showcase that and show us over the course of a few scenes or a couple episodes, etc.
Exactly, 100%. And if anything, that's kind of exactly how it goes in the books, because in the books, it's not Meryn Trant that she kills. Meryn Trant never goes to Braavos. What happened is actually, funnily enough, Sam, when he starts his journey south from the wall, which we obviously will cover in the next season as well, it's Sam stops off in Braavos, and he's got another Night's Watch brother with him named Darian. And Darian does not want to continue to go south with Sam. He wants to stay in Braavos and desert the Night's Watch completely. And the whole thing is that Arya ends up killing him for breaking his vows, because, she knows that he's in the Night's Watch, and that's what makes her think of Jon, and it is more of like an internal, like, struggle for her as well. So I 100% hear what you're saying as far as the whole, it needs to be more established and more set up, that she needs to have, like there needs to be a reason to kill this guy visually that needs to be established, but it needs to be established over the course of a couple episodes rather than just kind of thrown in this one random awkward sequence. Also, too, when you have
they give us
Tyrell,
the reason. Like, the reason makes sense that Arya is going to go after this guy. But, it's like, why don't you show her, like, following him, and, he does one bad thing after the other, and then ultimately, she sneaks her way into the brothel, and this is the last straw. Yeah. It's almost immediately like you jump to the last straw at the start of the storyline. And, it seems a little forced into getting Arya to where she needs to go in terms of wanting to break her kind of new training and go right after killing this guy.
It goes in line with my problem that I've had with this season in general, because obviously we know this is the last season that is based in any capacity really on a majority of the books, where, again, it is taking these two tremendous books where so much happens, and it definitely feels like George R.R. Martin is deliberately, like, trotting things out, because he can't really seem to figure out where he wants his characters to go as far as getting them to the next step of their destination. And so what comes of it is a result of where certain storylines feel dragged out and other storylines feel completely rushed, to the point where you get this, like, really weird jumbled conclusion where not really everything meshes together. And I feel like this sequence is kind of another victim of that. And for the most part, a pretty seamless episode. Like I said, I don't have a ton of problems with this episode, at least until we get back to Dorne, because just this is like Dorne for me in this episode. It's like the final nail in the coffin. As much stupidity as we've gotten in this storyline throughout the course of this season, the Jaime Bronn, the buddy cop adventure between Jaime and Bronn on the ship, the fight with the sand snakes and how terribly choreographed that was, just how stupid Illyria's plan was from the beginning, which again could have been by nature or design, because she was acting very impulsively and emotionally, all the way leading up to whatever the hell that prison sequence was with Bronn 2 episodes ago. And here's the moment where it all comes to fruition. Jaime meets with all of them. You have Illyria acting like a friggin' child out of nowhere, in a lot of moves that should easily have her beheaded just for acting the way that she is, or at the very least thrown in the dungeon with the rest of the sand snakes as well. And you have what is probably like the shortest and like most pointless negotiation tactic ever, where
Jaime's just like, we have reason to believe that she's in danger. Well, why didn't you say so? She can go back with you and take Tristan with me. I'm like,
what are we doing? Like,
the scene just goes, it's fast tracked. I like the scene a lot because Dorne is one of those places where, you know, when you're originally watching the show and, you know, this isn't your third or fourth time through, and you realize that Dorne is basically just, you know, fake. It doesn't exist. It's they don't really have any intention of making Dorne a major player in the Game of Thrones.
Right.
But, you know, when you're first here and you have this scene, you're sort of thinking like, oh, you know, Dr. Bashir has like a plan.
He's got a long game. He's got a plan. Exactly. Which again is what is for me at least, is what's getting you through the whole Dorne storyline and all the stupidity that happens in it. Because again, and that was the thing that people, I feel like that to me is where a lot of the source of criticism happens, is because they're like, from a story standpoint, you cannot logistically tell me that this guy is going to let all this stuff happen without having some sort of plan, which again is exactly how it plays out in the books. He does have a long-term plan. He is playing up to the Lannisters.
As a viewer, you want to have patience here,
right?
Because you're seeing like, oh, he's getting his son on the, you know,
on the small council.
On
he's
the small
starting
council.
to make moves, you know.
Yeah, he's basically trying to integrate his family with the Lannisters so that they have a strong bond. It's going to be the Tyrells, you know, Dorne, and basically the Lannisters kind of ruling the Seven Kingdoms. And that puts them in a position where if the Lannisters make a misstep, maybe they can sort of team with the Tyrells and take over the throne.
Right.
So it's one of those things where they are closer to ruling the Seven Kingdoms through an uneasy alliance. But that's not something the show ever really explores going forward. It's just when you're here in season 5, you're like, oh, they're a major threat. This could be something big. And you know, this particular scene here is fine. It's short, it's sweet.
Right.
You know, it's like Jaime's found and he wants Myrcella safe. Well, it's like, you want her safe. Well, the marriage must stand and you must put him, you know, Tristan, on the small council. So the fact is, like, he's playing the political levers and making sure that, you know, he's positioning them in the right spot. And then you have, you know, essentially this whole idea that that's going to be, you know, just destroyed and undermined
within a couple episodes.
Yeah, but it's as you said, as you know, someone that's acting like a complete child and can't understand, you know, how politics works.
And like I said, this is where my problem comes in, is the fact that it is one thing, like for me, the interest and the drama and the tension comes from the fact that Ilaria is unaware of Doran's plan, if there is a plan in place, which up to this point, for the majority, again, a viewer, I feel like with common sense would have to be operating under the assumption that this guy has some sort of long-term plan, because why the hell else would he be allowing for all this stuff to happen, you know? And for me, what ultimately destroys it, what destroys and undermines it even more than Ilaria's actions that happen over the course of the next 2 episodes, obviously her poisoning Myrcella in episode 10, and then her in the sand snake just completely killing Doran and Tristan and just wiping that entire storyline off the board. What kills me is the fact that, A, it's revealed that Doran has no plan at all, or if he does, it's never explained in any way, shape, or form. And if he does have a plan, he doesn't explain it well to Ilaria at all, which makes him a moron. And also, and here's the thing, so because like I said, either way it doesn't work, because if he doesn't explain his plan to Ilaria, he's a moron, and if he doesn't have a plan to begin with, then he's both a moron and he is completely spineless and is everything that Ilaria has been accusing him of. And if anything, almost makes you want to side with Ilaria when she kills and takes him out, which I'm like, I'm sorry, but if I have to pick between who's the more interesting character here, I'm going to go with Doran. And the fact that we're supposed to be on board with Ilaria's plans, which are where, again, it is a character that once again is not playing the Game of Thrones and is just acting out of complete spite and complete you know, and just complete like idiocy, you know, and complete emotional, you know, she's just letting her emotions and her anger and everything fuel all of her decisions. Like, if anything, to me, that was previously the types of behavior that were reserved for the villains and the antagonists of the show, you know, the Joffreys of the world, the Ramsays of the world, you know, and now we're almost having this like weird switch where Ilaria we're supposed to be rooting for her, obviously, you know, as she is later factored into Daenerys' plan, but then we're supposed to forget about all this stuff that she does. Like, it's just a mess from start to finish. And for me, I feel like is what is really the nail in the coffin of the entire Dorne storyline, because at the very least in the books, Doran is revealed to have a long-term plan. He clues in, the Lannister conspirators into what's going on as far as revealing, okay, here's how much you just jeopardize our long-term plan by trying to partake this petty revenge, and also take steps in the long term in order to both ensure that their alliance with the Lannisters is still standing while also continuing to undermine them, and by, getting started their Targaryen alliance. And everything that happens in the show, it is just a complete eruption, as far as everything that could potentially save this and make this into a really compelling and interesting storyline.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think we're basically, the two of us going over how bad the Dorne storyline is, it's like beating a dead horse. I think every single person that's watched Game of Thrones,
everybody criticized it from the get-go. It's why they cut it. It's why they cut it out. Like I said, there was a chance for them to redeem it by actually having it play out and have a major part in season 6.
Well,
and they just chose to ultimately cut it out.
Started season 6, first episode with a major Dorne twist,
right.
But
by having Doran reveal his plan to undermine the Lannisters while still playing face with them,
Yeah, something could have taken place, and I think what is it? Is Myrcella's death in season?
Myrcella's death is the next episode, in episode 10, and then the first episode of season 6 is Doran finding out about it, and then the Sansays just kill him and take him out, and the whole Dornish army just goes along with it. That's another baffling decision that we'll get to.
Yeah. So does Myrcella get killed in the same fashion in the books?
No, Myrcella is still very much alive in the books. So in the books, the way that it happens is Arya is not involved in the plot to kill Myrcella at all. The one who's leading in fact, Doran even goes out of his way to imprison the Sand Snakes before they have a chance to take revenge, because again, in the books, Doran is actually a very, very intelligent character and knows what his nieces are all going to be capable of, so he makes sure he gets them out of the way before they could do anything like this. And then it's his daughter, Arya, who is, again, not a character in the show at all, who attempts to carry out a plot where she attempts to pull off a little bit of political maneuvering and attempt to crown Myrcella Queen of the Seven Kingdoms over Tommen under Dornish law, because under Dornish law, it doesn't matter what your gender is. If you're the oldest, you are automatically crowned first. So obviously, the old Westerosi laws, Tommen is crowned king after Joffrey dies. But in the books, Doran's daughter Arya attempts to crown Myrcella queen and attempt to almost start like a civil war amongst them. And then Doran's soldiers find out. But the problem is one of Myrcella's co-conspirators ends up betraying them and attempts to kill Myrcella. And so Myrcella comes close to dying, but she survives and is still very much alive in the book.
So, again, we got into a point where fantasy booking is
right.
something that we're going to do. If they kept Myrcella alive and she goes with Tristan into King's Landing,
right?
You could still have a lot of what's taking place between Cersei and, the Tyrells, and you could still have the Sept being blown up, and, you could have something like Tommen jumping out the window. And then who's left? It's like
right.
You have Myrcella is there with Tristan, and you have Cersei, and you could have this whole storyline between Cersei taking the throne and now a Dornish claim that Myrcella should be the queen.
Exactly.
You could repurpose.
Right.
Maybe not exactly like the book, but you could have something
right.
where there's this other tension going on. That brings Dorne into the fold and is giving you a little more another party, because Dorne does back Daenerys, and when she comes in, and it's basically just with a couple scenes of Arya just being there, hey, I support you, thumbs up, Daenerys.
Right, and then she gets immediately taken out and dies, and it's like,
so it's like Dorne is, sort of...
It's just a missed opportunity.
Relegated to...
Right.
They're relegated to sort of the bench.
Right.
And they're not really utilized at all. And there's got to be some way in season, 6 and 7 where they could have had a lot more to do.
Yeah, a lot more to do.
Had their own separate storyline, whatever the case may be.
The fact that Dorne wasn't one of, if not the biggest storylines for season 6 for me is one of the biggest missed opportunities of this entire show, and season 6 was one of the most like that was like, I still remember like when season 6 was airing week to week, that was like, it was like a celebration. It was like a movie a week, the way that they structured that and build, between Jon's resurrection at the beginning of the season, all the brand stuff happening, with the Hodor and the door moment in the middle, and then all the way the building up, they bringing back the Hound, and then all their build up to Battle of the Bastards and Winds of Winter. They had such a great opportunity to have Dorne be just another amazingly juicy piece of that season. They just
wait. Are you telling me season 6 is the Broken Man comes to town?
Yes. The Broken Man. Oh, yeah.
Can't wait for that episode.
Oh, that's great episode.
That one's always a good one.
It's a great episode. But yeah, let's wrap it up with the Dragon Pit. I mean, there's not too much to say about this sequence as far as, like, we pretty much know how it plays out. I think the way that, like, I think the build-up to the actual attack from the Suns is amazing. Like, the way that you have Jorah fighting in the pits. He takes out all the guys, and then, like, you're not sure what, like, you see the look on his face as he picks up the spear, and nobody knows what's going to happen until he spears it, and this is the harpy, and then they reveal themselves.
Yeah, visual storytelling is amazing in this sequence, because it's like everyone's at the fighting pits, and you have these two guys, the skinny guy and the big guy, and they're like, "We fight for your honor," and they're just standing there looking at her, and she's just looking at them, and they're just like, "Hey, they're waiting for you, Daenerys."
Yeah.
Like you got to do something. You got to initiate this. And they're like, "Just clap." And she just goes the single clap.
Oh, it's great.
And it's visual storytelling. You're giving us an action that she's taking, and that's the start of the festivities. Everybody's going crazy. And then after that fight, what's his face? Dario there, right?
Yeah, you have Dario, Hezdar, and Tyrion going back and forth on like which one of them is going to win.
Yeah,
Dario's
these
like,
big
guys,
these big guys with their muscles, but they don't have muscles in particular places like here and there. And he's using his dagger to demonstrate where he would have killed a bigger guy.
Right.
And then as soon as he does this whole poetic thing, trying to impress Daenerys, basically the big guy just slices the head off.
The dude's head off.
Yeah,
it's great.
It's such great dialogue, and like it starts off the scene very light and very like funny, and then immediately as they're sort of paying attention to some dialogue between them, they're introducing the next round of combatants that includes Jorah, and as soon as they sort of hear, or Daenerys hears, "I fight for your loyalty," or whatever the line was, that's when everything freezes and her heart drops, because she, really is confronted. Like, that's a man that you actually respect and love. I don't know if it's in the, relationship sense, but she does respect and love him. And, he definitely loves her and, is devoted to her. And this is the moment where it's like, she could very well, if she claps, be sending him to his death. But she's kind of stuck in this position where she has to do it. And so it's great visual storytelling, because they showed us earlier in the sequence what that clap meant. And then now, later, after a bunch of dialogue, a bunch of, action, that clap means something different. And it means pretty much this could be Jorah's final moments of the show. And that's a little bit of suspense for us, the audience, for Daenerys, and also for Jorah, because it's not guaranteed that he's going to make it out of this fight alive.
100%. And then how they do the shift to the Sons of the Harpy, and how that sequence shifts from like one of like relative like fun to like, okay, a little bit of existential dread about the character, just straight up panic. And like the way that I love the way that, I don't know what that sound effect is, because the great thing about the sound effect as the Sons like kind of rise and reveal themselves is that you don't know if it's diegetic or non-diegetic. You don't know if that's like this weird whisper chant that the Sons are doing, or if it's just like the score that's being done in the background. But whatever it is, it's great. It completely, I think, spells out like the creepy tension that results, that kind of spills out into the absolute chaos as a result of it. Like I said, this is another sequence that plays out very, very differently than how it did in the books. But for my money, it's one of the few changes that I'm actually okay with, because the action that results of it is just, it's so different than anything else. It's not just like a straight up like armies crashing into each other or something like that. It's like still confined in a strange way. Like, it feels huge because you're in like this gigantic Coliseum-esque fighting arena, but the action feels very confined because of how it's shot. Because once the Suns start taking people out, you get the close-ups in the stands, and obviously as they get closer and closer to Daenerys, Dario, Jorah fighting their way.
The Suns take out her husband.
Yeah, they take out Hezdar too, which again clears up a couple of suspicions and that's the other thing too that I will say that this season did. I'm not going to say a great job of, but a much better job than I gave it credit for the first time in hindsight, which is where I think the season did a better job in hindsight of making you unsure as to whether or not Hizdahr was in league with the Suns this entire time, all the way up until the moment of the death, because you have him looking around and you're not quite sure. You're like, okay, like, is he like leading them or whatnot? And then he tries to like, show her. She's like, yeah, go this way. And then he gets stabbed and killed ultimately. So that kind of alleviates him and everything. And I guess they do go out of their way in order to show the Suns, killing all the masters and as well. They don't care. They're just killing everyone now. They don't care who's allied with Daenerys versus who's a citizen of Meereen. They're just trying to kill as many people as they can, which I guess is kind of like a little bit antithetical to what they're going for, because when we find out, it's one of those things that's undercut, because when we find out that they're being employed by the slave masters from the other cities, you're like, well, wouldn't you want to like spare as many people from Meereen as possible? But obviously I know that would probably
I think it's they were happy with anyone in that arena being killed because it creates a this moment
right
in Meereen where it's like, oh my God, like because of Daenerys, because of her rule, all these people, innocent or not, got killed, and therefore it creates like a generation of fear. Like we need to really, the masters struck hard against us, so like we need to obey them, and that's really what they're going for. They're going for like a little bit of a terrorism angle, and that it would have worked if they got Daenerys,
right? If they'd actually gotten Daenerys, and unfortunately hadn't been interrupted by, as I call it, the Dragon Ex Machina, because this is the first major instance where we actually get to see the dragons in action. We've been teased, we've been built up to, and even though the effects aren't quite as finished, and even though the dragons aren't quite as big as they, can get, like, man, there is just something to be said about seeing Drogon in action for the first time, because
it's great to see him chopping people in half and burning them up.
He comes in a literal ball of
carnage.
Fire. It's like you were saying, like, this is the sect of the show where we get into the moments, and even though the moments in between the moments are beyond stupid and they jump through so many hoops of logic in order to get there, the actual moments in themselves, man, do they deliver, because this is action spectacle. This is really when Game of Thrones hit the next level, as far as they were just between Hardhome last episode and then the Dragon Pit sequence this episode, where they were just showing they were on another level as far as action storytelling.
And I think the best part about this sequence is that the Sons of the Harpy are able to, throw spears into the dragon.
So it shows that he's like not indestructible too. So it still creates a little bit of tension there.
Yeah. So there's the dragons are weak. They're killable. And I think that's one of the best. Yeah, that's one of the best things that the show does, is remind us, like almost every single time they're in a confrontation, that there is the possibility that the dragons could die. And, I think that helps with the tension in the end game, specifically when, Daenerys loses one of the dragons to the Night King, but also when she loses one of the dragons to Cersei, and basically,
we'll get to that.
The Maesters tricks there. But the fact is, it's like they've always been, killable. Obviously, people fear them, and they fear them for great reason, because they are carnage machines. Yeah. But the fact is, you know that they're weak. That they have these sort of, they can be taken down, and I think that really gives us, the viewer, a good sense that anything could happen in any one of these dragon scenes as the series goes forward.
And also, obviously, we get like probably one of my favorite tracks on obviously, I love Ramin Djawadi in every track that he does for this entire show, but probably like it's in a competition with like the Night King's theme and the dragon score. I don't know. There's just something about like the kind of the rumble that builds up to like the dragon spewing fire, just that and then obviously Daenerys flying away. Like that might be my favorite track that Ramin Djawadi does for this entire show. And obviously it ends with, we get it for the first time, Daenerys actually riding the dragons. And like, obviously again, this ties into like How to Train Your Dragon and the fact that we came off an entire decade of like watching people riding dragons and shit. But like every time, it is just one of those moments where every time I see someone on the back of a dragon, it just fills me with so much joy, like to watch, because it's just, there's just something so majestic about it, about seeing like kind of this unification of like humankind and like these tremendous beasts that are so terrifying and it's so graceful at the same time, and like I feel like it's perfectly summarized by Tyrion seeing her fly off. Like that's the moment that Tyrion needs to confirm that it's like, yeah, she might be our chance. It's in a moment of absolute defeat, as she's obviously literally fleeing the battle, and she's literally fleeing the city that she's sworn to protect. in a moment like this, but it's really complex, and like how it is able to translate across so many different beats with just that one moment. Like it's amazing. It's for me like top 10 moments for me of the show easily. That is her flying on Drogon for the first time, and it's setting up for some even more awesome moments, obviously, in the next couple seasons once the dragons are more fully grown too, to say the least. So with that being said, that is our thoughts on the next in the line of penultimate. This is our 5th penultimate episode, The Dance of Dragons. We've got one more episode left in season 5, and then we're really in the home stretch. Season 6, Battle of the Bastards and Winds of Winter season next, before we wrap it up with the final 13 episodes. Thank you guys once again for tuning into another episode of Talkin Thrones. We're still having such a blast breaking these down for you guys week by week. Like I said, we're not stopping until we hit the finale. Pat, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Hey, listen, Dom. Basically,
I saw you finally posted something. Something.
I'm on Instagram at Patrick W. Huber, and basically, it's that time of the year. I'm doing some live streams at work. So basically, the last 2 posts I have are basically related to that. One was like a month or so ago, like in March, I believe. There was a live stream that my students were doing, and I was helping them out with that. And then this one here was the Yom HaShoah Holocaust Remembrance Ceremony that happened at the college. And, so basically live streaming that, really helping out, our history department who was involved in putting that on. And so I just sort of, posted like, a little bit of a view from the tech booth, just to share what I was doing, some live streaming.
Nice. Good stuff, dude. Nice. Keep it up. Yeah, so go follow Pat with everything he's got going on there. Follow myself at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms, or don't. I don't really care about that. That's just my personal stuff where I just like posting for goofs and laughs. But make sure you do follow the official Talking TV podcast stuff across all platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of the usual. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube if you're not already. Be sure to follow us on Twitch if you're not already. Be sure to keep tuning in for new episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. They're uploaded every Friday. Like I said, all the way up until the finale. We have 1 episode left of season 5, and next week's jam-packed finale, Mother's Mercy. We're going to have a lot to talk about in that season. But as always, people, stay frosty, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.